And so it's very interesting to see in our culture, back to the hopelessness and despair that you were mentioning that's characterizing young adults' life. It's like, well, it's all about me. That's the self-esteem movement. But then me becomes, it's all about what I want. And then that becomes, it's all about what I want right now. Then it's what the lowest part of me wants right now, and to hell with everyone else. It's like, okay, how are you going to play that game without being desperate? You're going to be desperate as soon as you start playing that game. And the other thing, it's even worse than that, because you're going to end up with Jeremy, the porn star problem. Anybody, you're not going to be very happy about being with the people who want to play that game with you, because they're not going to be the people that are really going to make you feel that life is worth living. They're going to be the people, especially on the female side, women who are willing to take advantage of themselves for short-term sexual gratification. Those aren't happy women. They're usually damaged women. And if they're not damaged when they start playing that game, they're going to be plenty damaged by the time they're done with it.
The last time that we spoke, me and you talked about population decline, and the Census Bureau just released today predicting that the US population will decline for the first time ever by the year 2100 after peaking in 2080. So their estimates showed that the US population, which is about 333 million at the moment, is expected to reach 370 by 2080, but will be back down to 366 by 2100. And even immigration can't offset this birth rate decline. Over the last 2 years, do you think things have got better or worse than you anticipated from birth rate and marriage rate standpoint?
I think they're probably still getting worse. And I think Musk is one of the few people, Elon Musk is one of the, in case anybody was wondering, he's one of the few people who's called out the danger of, a one-child policy, or the idea that we should decrease the population. I mean, things that don't grow die, but they die for all sorts of reasons. And we could tie this back to identity. What's my identity? I could say, well, it's how I feel about myself. That's the line that's used everywhere now. You don't get to tell me who I am. I know who I am. I'm who I feel I am. Well, first of all, I don't even know what you mean by feel. Like, what the hell? What does that mean? You're your emotional state at the moment, and you can just impose that on everybody. That's your theory, is it? That's the theory of a 2-year-old. Literally. That's a very bad theory. Well, where could your identity be other than that? Well, one of my identities when I taught at Harvard was professor, obviously, and that was a good identity. But, that it wasn't something I was carrying around in my head. It was a pattern of relationship that I had with a whole bunch of people, all my students, right? It wasn't inside my head. Now, there was a concordance between my representation of myself and how I was acting in the world, and that concordance was the health. It wasn't what I thought of myself. Part of the reason that you can take some, let's call it gratification, from being a successful podcaster is that you're actually a successful podcaster. It's not in your head. It's in 1.5 million subscribers. It's how many podcasts have you done?
700.
Okay, so it's in 700 podcasts. It's not something you're carrying around in your head.
Do you remember, I loved the 42 rules that created the 24 that you ended up coming up with, but there's one that you didn't use. If you have to choose, be the one who does things,
right? Not
the one who is seen to do things.
Exactly, absolutely.
I love that rule.
Oh yeah, that's a great rule. Yeah, well, the thing is that you can do almost anything you want if you're willing to take responsibility for it, if you don't want credit. One of the most effective political maneuverers I've ever seen, woman she's so brilliant. I won't tell you who she is, but she's so sharp. She's so brilliant. And she told me the last time I saw her, she's had her finger in pies for like 30 years, popping up in places you'd never expect. And I asked her, it's like, how the hell did you pull this off? And she said, oh, I decided 30 years ago that I could do whatever I wanted if I didn't want credit. And so that's exactly what she's done. And she's had a stellar career, stellar. And I've worked with other people who've done the same thing. It's very interesting It's a very interesting thing to realize. You might say, well, why would I want the responsibility without the glory? It's like, A, do you want the glory? Are you so sure that that wouldn't just get in your way? There's something to be said for anonymity. And second, maybe you want the responsibility because that's the adventure. You actually get to do the thing that someone else just wants to take credit for. Well, maybe doing the thing is plenty of reward in and of itself with regard to identity. When I was a professor, I was also a husband and I was also a father. Well, those were identities, but they weren't in my head. They were embedded in the relationship I had with my kids, and that was a meaningful relationship, embedded in the relationship I had with my wife. You can't be, it's almost heretical to say this in the modern world. You can't be isolated, alone, without responsibility, and pursuing your hedonistic nonsense and not be insane and miserable. Those are all the same thing, right? And so, it's got to the point, I've said things that have made me somewhat unpopular, like it's very difficult for people to mature until they have a child. So you find a huge part of what you are in that relationship. It makes you responsible, makes you grow up. It gives you the opportunity to mentor someone. You have someone around who's more important than you. Well, that's part of being mentally healthy. It's a huge part of it. This enterprise that I put together in London, helped put together, Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. We're trying to put forward a model of governance. It's called a subsidiary model. And the idea is that people have multiple social roles that scale. There's you should take care of yourself, integrate yourself, which means you can conduct yourself properly across the medium to long run. You're self-sustaining. Then you can maybe extend that to your partner, and then to your family, and then to your local community, and then to broader communities as you become more and more competent and able to take on that responsibility. That's the alternative to isolated hedonic slavery. You're slave to your own whims. And it's the alternative to tyranny, because if you take on all that responsibility, you don't have any need for someone to govern you. And so that's another example of how I blamed it on the therapists a little bit. I called them liberal, Protestant, secularists. And that's because they think about the locus of the psyche as interior, subjective. That's what a liberal would do. It's just not accurate. That isn't the way the psyche works. It's not in your head. It's in your head and in the world at the same time. It's truly the case that your sanity is the concordance between you as an individual and the world. That's the sanity. It's not the proper structuring of your psyche or your brain, for that matter, inside your skull. You're distributed out into the world. And you should be. And you want to be. That's where the adventure is. You want to be solipsistic? A solipsistic porn masturbator. Jesus, it's no wonder you'd be aimless and miserable. Well, God, it's so pathetic. Why am I so unhappy? It's because you think about yourself. Oh, no, you think about the lowest impulses in yourself all the time. That's why you're miserable.
Whilst being at ARC, what I thought was particularly interesting was your live event that you guys did at the O2 on the evening time. And everyone was great. But Douglas, I thought, was just a tour de force that evening. What have you learned since being friends with Douglas? How's he impacted you or influenced you?
Well, Douglas is very, very disagreeable, and he enjoys combat. And that isn't something that really characterizes, I don't enjoy combat at all. I mean, part of the reason that it's perverse, I suppose, in some ways, part of the reason that I will engage in difficult conversations is because I don't want to have them forever. And so, one of the rules I had in my marriage, and it was a rule that my wife also was pleased to follow, was that if we have a problem, we're going to deal with it right now. And we're going to deal with it right to the bottom. And that's very unpleasant. But if you do it sometimes you only have to do it once and the problem goes away, and then you don't have that bloody problem every day for the rest of your life. And sometimes it takes, 20 times before it's fixed, before you've got to the bottom of things. And that can be very unpleasant. Douglas is very, very good at not letting people off the hook. He's very tough, and he's very good at defending himself. And there's a pitilessness about him that's extraordinarily admirable. It's a judicious pitilessness, and it's a dangerous game to play, because there's another gospel realization, let's say, is the standards you judge other people by will be the standards that you yourself are judged by. And the reason for that is, well, how are you going to judge everyone else and not apply the same standards to yourself? Like, that's not going to happen, because you become what you practice, and you'll turn the hostile eye that you turn on others, you will absolutely turn on yourself. There's no way around that. And so Douglas plays a dangerous game because he's very combative, but he's also extremely careful. He's very careful with his words. And he toured with me through Europe